Welcome to day 35 of the 365-day epic journey. 365 lessons in 365 days. It really is an epic journey. I'm Dalene FM and today we're going to be discussing the rule of thirds. Yeah, and the golden mean. See that?
There's no going
you can do what you wanna do. You can do what you wanna do.
Before I get into too much detail about the Fibonacci sequence and the rule of thirds, I just want to say that what I'm about to show you is all very technical, and if you've been in art for more than 5 minutes, you'll know what I'm talking about before I even start. If not, then please don't take this too seriously. There's a lot of art theorists that will swear by the Fibonacci sequence, but I believe it's fun to know, it's good to know, it's fun to play with these numbers, but at the end of the day, as artists, our main function is to be creative, and as soon as we get involved with something too mathematical, it's going to interfere with our creativity. So yes, by all means take an interest in it, but don't get so bogged down by this that your creativity gets affected. Okay. So to go back to the beginning, this Mr. Fibonacci was an Italian chappie back in the day that discovered the sequence of numbers while he was studying the breeding habits of rabbits. It was after his death that these numbers were applied to all sorts of other things and found to be equally relevant. And there's a lot of artists, particularly classic artists, that swear by these numbers and make sure that their compositions fit these numbers absolutely perfectly. But it is also true, in my opinion, that if you look at pretty much anything in nature, you're going to find the sequence, because it's actually quite a varied sequence. Somewhere along the line you will find this sequence matching something. So look, it's not all that magic, it's just interesting to understand. Okay, so let's get rid of Mr. Fibonacci. Alright, so the sequence starts with 1, and the whole idea is that you add the number plus the number that comes before it to get the next number. So of course there's nothing in front of 1, so 1 and nothing is 1. So you add those two together to get the next number. So 1 and 1 is 2, and then 2 and 1 is 3, and 3 and 2 is 5, and so it went. So you take each number and the number in front of it, add it together to make the next number. Now something interesting starts to happen when you start trying to figure out a ratio here. Now if you take the second number and divide it by the first number, you're going to get a ratio. In this case, 1 divided by 1 is simply 1. 2 divided by 1 is 2. It's as simple as that. When you start getting to 3 and 2, 2 divided into 3 or 3 divided by 2, you start to get a fraction, 1.5. Let me change my pen color, then you'll see the difference. Here, when you go 5 divided by 3, you're getting 1.6, and from there onwards, your fraction is 1.6 something. The decimal points get smaller and smaller, but the first decimal point is always going to be 6. By the time you get to 89 divided into 144, you're getting close to the Fibonacci number, or the golden ratio, 1.6179. At 144 into 233, you're getting 1.61805. Now, I'm using 5 decimal points here because I want to show you that from this point onwards, your first 3 decimal points are going to be the same regardless. So the number gets progressively smaller and smaller, but ever so slightly. It now stays consistently 1.618. The fractional minute little changes are in smaller and smaller and smaller decimal places. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how this actually translates to art. So let's start thinking about this as squares. Okay, so I've now drawn a square. The sides are equal, so it's just a plain square. So now the only thing that we can do is draw another square next to it, and that's our second one. But now, of course, the sum of the two of the sides is 2. So now we're going to draw a square that is the same on that side, and now we've got the sum of 2 of the sides is 3, and we draw the next square, and the sum of 2 of the sides is 5, and so we go, and the numbers will follow the Fibonacci sequence. We keep going. We've now got 21, and now we've got 34, And if you see it goes round and round, it automatically does that. If you do this exercise for yourself, you'll see there's only one place that the square can go. And now we've got 89. Now I won't draw any more than that because it'll just get bigger and bigger. Again, if you've been in art for more than 5 minutes, you'll start recognizing this because already this is starting to look like a golden ratio. But the next thing we can do, if we draw a radius from the bottom point here, if we draw a radius from the bottom point and we draw our arc in that direction on each of the squares, you'll notice something start to happen. And now I'm not going to do it step by step like I did with the squares. I'll just put them all in together. But what I've done here is drawn the radius and the arc for each square progressively as it gets spirals smaller and smaller into the middle. Now, this is commonly known as the Fibonacci spiral. The next thing we can do with this series of squares is, if you take your biggest square that you've got, in this case it's the 89, and we divide it in half, and from that half point there, we draw a line across to the top point. So we're drawing a diagonal across half of the square. And if we lay that down, you'll see that it is then the same length as that half of that block plus all the other blocks. And that is consistent throughout. If you do that with each of the squares, you'll find that the same thing happens. Now, that is not significant. It is simply an easy way to calculate it. So now you're asking yourself, how does this become the golden mean, which is what artists refer to it as. The golden mean is now, if you take your Fibonacci square, and on those points, you draw a horizontal line. Your horizontal line at this point, across the top of those squares, and then you do it the same from the same distance here. So those distances there are equal. And then you do the same thing here. You draw your line on the side of those squares, and then this distance here will be the same. So that distance and that distance are equal. Then you end up with the square in the middle. Okay, so the ratio of this rectangle now, this rectangle that we're looking at here, is apparently, according to people who believe in the Fibonacci sequence, the most pleasing on the eye. Now, what it means is that that length, the short side, let's just call it x, multiplied by 1.618 will give you the other side. So that will be x times 1.618. So let's assume, let's do it in red. Let's assume that this was the number, whatever, 10 centimeters, 10 meters. Then this would work out to 16.18. So it would be the length of the short side multiplied by 1.618 will give you the length of the long side, and that apparently is the most pleasing size. But there is evidence to suggest that it works, and there's other evidence to suggest that it doesn't. I saw a university professor once putting this to the test, and as many people that chose the Fibonacci sequence rectangle on the golden ratio, there were as many people that chose rectangles that were not based on the ratio. So it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, really. In classical art, it is considered to have been far more important, where a focal point would have been added to one of these points. So in your painting, your focal point would fall on one of these 2 points, or they would fall within one of these quadrants, or they would fall on the side of one of these lines. Artists in their wisdom have found a way to reduce how complicated this is. Now, if you have a look, the ratio of 1.618 is pretty darn close to 1.5. So all artists have done now is they have taken that rectangle and just divided it by 3. Now this will work on any canvas size. Any canvas size that you've got, regardless of whether or not it's a rectangle that's based on the Fibonacci sequence, it doesn't matter. If you take your canvas and divide the long side by 3 and divide the short side by 3, you're going to get a ratio getting pretty darn close to the Fibonacci sequence without actually having to go into the whole maths of it. And like I said, it will work on any canvas size. So you could take a square canvas and divide it up into thirds, and you could take a vertical canvas and divide it up into thirds. So what we're left here is a canvas that's divided up into 9 equal parts, and the theory is that your central focal point should fall on any one of these 4 points, or to the left, right, top, and bottom. In other words, anywhere else except in that middle square. So it could be right across the top, it could be that whole side, it could be one of the quadrants, either way, but it should not be slap bang in the middle. Now I'm going to show you a couple of examples when we talk about various different compositions tomorrow where that rule is broken. And that's the one thing about art that you actually need to remember. All rules are made to be broken. So everything that I'm teaching you now, you learn, you understand it, you can choose to use them or you can choose not to use them. It's entirely up to you. However, the rule of thirds is probably one of those rules of art that really do help to make your composition more pleasing on the eye. And when we go through compositions tomorrow, we'll go through compositions that both follow this rule and those that don't. Now, the beauty of the Fibonacci sequence is that you really can find it in nature in almost anything that you see. This is another example that you'll see quite often, and that is the Parthenon. The ratio of the Parthenon from top to bottom versus from left to right is exactly that. It's that 1.618 of this side. So that would be x multiplied by 1.618 to give you the long side. And that's a very, very common example to be shown as where architects have used the Fibonacci sequence. You'll notice it also in the human body where there's various different areas of the body where the ratios apply. Here's a couple more examples of how the Fibonacci sequence is spotted in nature. Here's another one of a tornado laid on top of the Fibonacci spiral. This is also one that you see quite often. A woman flicking her hair in the arc of the water is the Fibonacci spiral. So the Fibonacci spiral is really, really attractive, and it's fun to play with. But really, at the end of the day, we're artists and we want to maintain our creativity. So to simplify it, we're just going to call it the rule of thirds. Well, artists, I hope that explains a little bit more about what the rule of thirds actually is and where it came from and why it is that the Fibonacci sequence is so much fun to look at. So if you've enjoyed this little video, please would you like and share and subscribe and send it around the internet. The more about art we know, the better, and the more people that we get together on this page, the more fun we're going to have. Don't forget the YouTube channel, and I will see you tomorrow for a much more detailed look at the different types of compositions and how you can use them to improve your art. I'll see you then. Bye.
That's what you want to do. Amen. Amen.
And he discovered inadvertently that these numbers work with all sorts of things, not only the breeding habits of rabbits, but in his lifetime it was never more than just a study of the breeding rabbits of habits. The breeding... Okay. Fibonacci was an Italian chap who, when studying... Oh my God. Fibonacci was an Italian chap who, when studying the breeding rabbit... Am I saying breeding rabbits of habits?